Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have some news out of the state of New Hampshire where former Republican Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown has officially announced he is jumping into the 2026 Senate race in the state, going up against Democrat Chris Papis, where Senator Jeanne Shaheen is retiring. This is big news as it's been speculated for months now that Scott Brown was considering entering this race. Today he has officially entered the race, and now we know on that front. This article, it came from WMUR, a local news station in New Hampshire. Scott Brown was interviewed by the political director, Adam Sexton. Scott Brown said, "The reason I'm running is he is kind of fed up with the federal delegation. We've been blessed in New Hampshire with Governors Chris Sununu and Governor Kelly Ayotte, the legislature and the executive council, all working hard for years to protect the New Hampshire advantage, while we see in the federal delegation the overtaxation and overregulations. On the policy stuff, the open borders, sanctuary cities, and zealously fighting to protect the so-called right of illegals." Scott Brown has been speculated for months now as the number one pick for many Republicans who want to flip this seat back to the Republican side following the retirement of Senator Jeanne Shaheen. It's also worth noting the former governor of the state, Chris Sununu, who President Trump publicly and privately tried to recruit into this race. Sununu said a few months ago he would not be running in this race, which hurts the Republicans' chances at winning this. Scott Brown was asked about Sununu's decision and said, "Listen, Chris and I have been friends for years. I like Chris, obviously. I think he would make a great senator, but he's making decisions that are important for him and his family." So this is obviously very interesting because without a doubt, Chris Sununu not being in this race does give the Democrats a little bit more certainty at being able to hold this seat. But it's still worth noting that this race is going to be very competitive. And a large reason being the Democratic incumbent, Jeanne Shaheen, is retiring, so it is going to be a new Democrat leading the ticket. However, U.S. Representative Chris Papis, who represents New Hampshire's 1st District, is the only declared Democrat right now, and barring a completely out of left field surprise primary election, Papis will be the Democratic nominee without too much of a problem. He's very electorally formidable in its own right. He'll be going up against, in all likelihood, Scott Brown. Again, other Republicans may decide to jump in this race, but it's looking like a Papis versus Scott Brown election is going to be the most likely outcome. And a few things to be true at once. When you look at the electoral history of New Hampshire, it really depends on what race you're looking at. At the presidential level, it was a lean Democratic state in 2024, a likely Democratic state in 2020, and 2016 a tilt Democratic state. So the rankings in the last 3 elections have been kind of all over the place at the presidential level. At the Senate level, it's been a little bit more Democratic. In 2022, this was supposed to be a more competitive election. Maggie Hassan ended up defeating Don Bolduc by about 9 points, so that ended up being a likely Democratic win. Back in 2020, Jeanne Shaheen defeated her Republican opponent, Corky Mesner, by 15.6%. But the last Senate race before that was 2016, where Hassan only defeated the then Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte by 0.14%. It needs to be worth stating, Scott Brown is the strongest Republican candidate for Senate since Kelly Ayotte back in 2016, which gives the Republicans a much better chance at winning this seat than they had in 2020 and 2022. And I know Democrats will be quick to write off the fact that he's not Chris Sununu, so Scott Brown will not have as much of a chance to win, but I'm saying as a former senator, he's going to have a lot of high name recognition and a lot of help in all likelihood from fundraising and support from Washington and the National Republicans, which will at very least make this race pretty competitive going into November. At the governor level, New Hampshire's actually been a pretty reliable red state. It voted likely Republican for Kelly Ayotte in 2024 after 2 years in a row of voting for Sununu by over 15% safe in 2022 and 2020. And back in 2018, Sununu also won by a likely Republican margin, 2016 a lean Republican margin. So the governor level, it's been pretty reliable Republican. At the House level, the opposite. It's been pretty much consistently likely Democrat in every election for a while now. 2024, both House seats, including Papis' 1st District, voted likely Democrat. Same thing in 2022, same thing in 2020, and same thing in 2018. The last time that wasn't the case was 2016, when it was a lean race in both instances, and there was also third-party candidates splitting the vote in both situations. So New Hampshire is a very interesting state because it depends on what the race is by the overall political lean of the state. It is worth noting that in recent elections, it certainly seems like the Democrats have had a pretty slight or lean advantage in the state. And going into 2026, I would expect the Democrats to have an advantage in the Senate race. But 2024, 2.8% for Harris over Trump was very close. The midterm election in 2026 is going to be interesting because it depends on how the Democrats are doing and how President Trump is viewed. Historical expectations suggest that Republicans should be doing worse off than Democrats. Democrats should be in for a good night come 2026. But like with 2022, it's not always 100% guaranteed to go that way. 2022, the Republicans ended up having more of like a very minor overall win night for them. It was not the big red wave that they were expecting and hoping for. As for 2026, we'll have to wait and see how that all goes. But for this Senate race right now, I'm going to actually start this race out as lean Democrat. And perhaps my biggest hot take of the cycle is I think Scott Brown is going to make this race very, very competitive. Being a former U.S. Senator, having campaigned for that and winning a very tough race in Massachusetts and running against Elizabeth Warren in 2012, where now she's won, I believe, like 20 points in 2 elections now. Brown only loses the incumbent Republican by about 8 points in the Democratic state of Massachusetts in 2012. I think Scott Brown will be able to be very formidable against Chris Papis. He'll give the Republicans the best chance at winning this race. But I do think Papis right now starts out as the favorite to win in between a 1% and 5% margin of victory at this time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and I hope to see you in a future video.